Welcome to the Carpenter Art Center on this wonderful fall day. We're very happy to have you here. My name is Gib Johnson. I'm one of the many volunteers at the Art Center. We welcome you. And we welcome you to the current show, Thinking Abstractly. It closes on Monday, October 23rd, and we're very happy to have it in the show. We also want to thank Larry Nimmer for videotaping this jurors talk today. We appreciate it. Larry does it so often, and we appreciate all his efforts and time. It's my pleasure today to introduce artist Connie Connally, who juried this show. Connie attended Oklahoma University. She received her BFA magna cum laude from Wichita State University in 1975. In 2004, she got her Master's of Fine Art from Southern Methodist University in Dallas. Connie was raised in Oklahoma, spent some years in Wichita, Kansas, and then headed to Dallas, Texas, where she lived for many years. She moved to Santa Barbara in 2005. Connie has been an artist as long as she can remember and has considered herself a professional since 1975. She is represented by galleries in California, Nebraska, New Mexico, Texas, Mexico, and England. Of her art, Ken Marvel, the owner of the Lou Allen Gallery in Santa Fe, New Mexico, says, quote, Connie Connally paints stunning abstract canvases of complex elegance with imagery that merges harmoniously, nearly completely, both representational reference and powerful abstraction. Connally's poetic colorscapes, with their expressive brushwork, sweeping gestural marks, and animated cadence, reflect the artist's passion for distilling the essence of her observations of nature, and situate her work as the vital interplay between memory and imagination. Connally also finds inspiration in the natural coastlines and vegetation of California, where she lives and works. To give you an idea of a small sample of her recent exhibits, in May through June of this year, her work was in the show Drawn from Life at the Jane Deering Gallery in Gloucester, Mass. Starting this coming November, her work will be in Place in Time Continued at the Jack Meyer Gallery in Houston, Texas. And beginning in February 2018, she'll be represented in A River's Journey at the Wildling Museum of Art and Nature in Solvang. So that's very close. You can all see that. We thank Connie Connally and are honored to have her here to speak to us today.
Thank you. So my talk today is about taking landscape to abstract. How does that happen? My paintings, let me start back up here. Pablo Picasso said, "There is no abstract art. You must always start with something. Afterward, you can remove all traces of reality." Today, I want to share my passion for creating abstract art. I will talk about my influences and examine my working process, starting with reality and moving it to abstractions. So my paintings merge representational reference with the power of abstraction. I do this by using three things: observation, memory, and invention. Observation. When I first moved to Santa Barbara in 2005, I was totally inspired by the coastlines and verdure of Southern California. But for this past year, I've been participating with a group of 6 women artists called Rose Compass, and we've been examining the Santa Ynez River and the watershed. And this opportunity has taken me more into the interiors of our forest to see the mountains where the Santa Ynez begins and follow its path to where it spills out into the Pacific Ocean. And you will see that influence in my work today. But first, I want to acknowledge the artist that inspires me the most. That's right. And that is also influences all my work, and that's the great second-generation abstract expressionist Joan Mitchell, pictured here. Mitchell was born in Chicago in 1925. She received her MFA at the Art Institute of Chicago in 1950. And during her school years, she received a foreign traveling fellowship that she used to go to France. And it was her time there that she moved her work from figurative to abstraction. When she moved back or returned to New York, Mitchell participated in a groundbreaking exhibition called the Ninth Street Show, and this was in 1951. It was organized by a group of artists who occupied these studios called the Downtown Group, later in New York City. In New York City, and they would be later called the Club. It was made up of 70 artists, including Elaine and Willem de Kooning, Lee Krasner, and Jackson Pollock, Hans Hofmann, Franz Klein, Grace Hartigan, and of course, Joan Mitchell. And the exhibition was a showcase for the post-war New York avant-garde artists, and it was a great success. So Mitchell was one of the younger artists of this group, and this show established her reputation as one of the leading American abstract expressionists. So in 1955, Mitchell began dividing her time between New York and France. And then she eventually settled in Vitry, France, and it's a small little town just north of Paris, near Monet's Giverny, as Monet was one of Mitchell's influences, as well as Matisse and Van Gogh. But when Mitchell bought the home in Vitry, she was required to maintain the gardens on this 2-acre estate. So she decided to plant sunflowers. And so from 1969 until her death in 1992, the sunflower would totally inspire her. So I want to talk about how to use memory as a tool in creating a painting. For Mitchell, she was inspired by the memories of her feelings. For example, her experiences with the sunflowers planted in her garden. She would say, "If only I could feel a sunflower." So her aim was not to replicate the flower, but to present her empathy for the sunflower. She said, "They are young, they have a lot of personality, and soon they die. If I see a sunflower drooping, I can droop with it. I can draw it, and I can feel it until its death. They are big, and there are these gestural things. I can feel the sunflower almost physically." And I think you can see the essence of that in these two paintings that she did of her sunflowers. This one on the right was done in 1969 in one of her first sunflower paintings. And the one on the left was done just the year before she died, in 1990 through 91. And notice how large these paintings are. The one on the left is over 110 by 157 inches. So she's really using the idea of scale to talk about the bigness she's feeling in the sunflowers and these big gestural marks that she has, and this intense chrome orange. Now, orange was not one of Mitchell's favorite colors until she met the sunflower, and then she continued to use that orange in her palette then for the rest of her life. Now, she used the orange just like she used the big gestural marks and the bigness of the scale because she felt like those elements embodied the emotional intensity she was trying to convey. She wanted you to feel what she was feeling. So now with my own work and the big orange wild color on the Figueroa Mountain. In 2016 and 2017, the mountain experienced this incredible super bloom of California poppies. and that bright orange was just ablaze on the face of the mountain. Now the photos were pretty amazing, but they really do not capture what I remember that day was all about. I remember walking on the mountainside, and let me pull my samples up here. I remember walking on that mountainside and the winds just move an ocean of wild orange waves of flowers whipping around me. It was incredible. So how do I use this memory of the day to distill the essence of that on my canvas? Invention. So this is Wild Volunteer. It is 50 by 52 inches. It's oil on canvas. So I use scale, mark making, and color to create that intensity. First, the scale. At 50 by 52, when you walk up to it, it really does encompass you. And the marks are purposefully powerful and aggressive, like the day was for me. And these multiple intense oranges are just that, very intense. And then there's this chrome yellow whipping around these little orbs. And that really does speak to the shapes of the poppies themselves. So now the canvas literally transcends nature and becomes its own wilderness. Now the painting is the place. Let me get there. Now you'll notice on the right painting, it's labeled finished painting, and on the left, sketch. And this really is a major part of my working process. I work back and forth from the larger oils and the smaller gouache pieces. And in this particular case, the oil was done first. And then I really work on the mark making and see if I can put a big idea in a very small scale. So it really is a back and forth conversation. Now in this case, this is the last iteration of my poppies and lupin, but this year the lupin won out. They were the bigger show. So I created this large 34 by 72 inch canvas with this very abstracted lupin mauves and purples in the foreground. Now this is new to my canvas this year. I've decided to leave a little hint of reality with the shape of the mountain in the background. And another element that I use quite frequently is I'm taking the blue of the sky that's in the background and letting it spill over into the foreground, so that really creates a push-pull tension between foreground and background. Now the Carrizo Plains also had a big super bloom, but theirs was in chrome yellow. And there were a lot of different chrome yellow flowers that were out on the mountainside, but I loved these desert candle, these crazy, tall, spindly wildflowers. So I went first, in this case, to my gouache paintings and used them to just kind of play with those real tall vertical marks across a long horizontal plane. Now the finished painting is 10 inches by 36 inches. And again, I'm trying to experiment with using a little bit of reality and showing the mountains in the background. There's a valley in front and there's a lake. But I'm inventing the idea of the lake spilling over into the foreground and again dancing on the surface. And that really does just acknowledge that this is the canvas surface. It's bringing that blue of the sky and the water and making that interaction of push-pull from the foreground to the background. Now I know a lot of you may be familiar with Nahoy Falls. This year we received a nice amount of rain in February that brought a lot of water that cascaded over the pretty falls. And this painting is 36 inches tall and 10 inches wide. And you can tell in the mark making, I'm trying to work with the long vertical marks to acknowledge the verticality of the falls. The blues are like the mist of the water spilling over, and the greens are about the pretty little ferns that are growing on both sides of the fall. Now in this case, I did start with this small gouache piece. It's called Falling Meadow Field Study. It's 8.5 by 3 inches. And you can tell just now I'm starting to figure out now how many marks, how much verticality of these marks will it really start to define that fall. Now I ended up naming these Falling Meadow because in the Chumash language, Nahoy translates as meadow. So that's my way. I think titles are an important component of your painting, and that brings in another element. Moving on to Wilderness Encounter 1 and 2. Now each one of these is 50 by 52 inches oil on canvas. And they are inspired, it's a diptych inspired by the iconic red rock that's in Los Padres National Forest. Now I love the distinct gray veins that had been chiseled in the rock over the ages. And then there were these cold gray boulders that were at the base of the rock. But my eye also was drawn to the golden autumn leaves that were playing on either side of the boulder, as well as on the mountain face behind it. So at this point when we went, there was hardly any water. So it was just a memory. So in Wilderness Encounter 1 and 2, these two pieces were painted from my memory of the experience and not from the photos that were taken that day. And also, I wanted to make a mark that felt like the craggly edges of the boulders and the rustle of the leaves flitting about. And I tried to make it with a brush, but it just wasn't working. So I went into my kitchen and I found a silicone food scraper. And I was able to, with that food scraper, come back out and make these craggly edges just like the boulders I remembered. And some of these little flitty marks kind of address the trees and things that were there that day. So sometimes it's necessary to invent a tool to help you make the mark that gets to the essence of your observations and memories of that experience. Sometimes I draw exactly what I see, and I do this to help my mind and my hand learn the terrain and just what kinds of marks will be necessary to describe that object. And all these marks really do get translated into these abstractions. This is red rock reflection. It's 3 by 3 inches. It's a gouache drawing. Now this is the smallest of my abstractions done to date. It was produced with both my gouache brushes and that little silicone food scraper. Now when I started this whole project, this was actually the first piece that I did. And when it was time to do the two larger diptych pieces, I taped this little piece right up next to my easel, and I used that to respond to make the larger two paintings. One of the best things that we have been able to experience with our Rose Compass group has been gaining access to places the public doesn't usually get to see. We were able to hike back into the mountain to see the origin of the Santa Ynez River. The headwater of the Santa Ynez begins as Alder Creek. The painting here, Headwaters, is 44 by 30 inches oil on canvas. And it does explore the chaos of that wilderness. And then using the blue, I'm starting at the top, I'm suggesting that the water's just starting to seep through and create this little pool that will eventually be a stream that flows into the Santa Ynez River. This is Where Winds Will. It's 40 by 54 inches. Take that off here. It's oil on canvas, and it explores the dunes at Surf Beach near Lompoc, being swept away and reshaped by the winds and the rains that push the Santa Ynez River through to the Pacific Ocean. And I encountered these dunes several times. So I started with these smaller gouache paintings, and I'm starting to think about the blueness of the river and the power that it took to literally push through here where the beach once was, right into the Pacific Ocean. I also remember how blue, the beautiful blue it was that day with the pretty clouds that were hung overhead. So I hope you get the feel of the idea in this painting titled Moving Through. It's 16 by 16, oil on canvas. The idea of the river pushing through the ocean and literally just shoving to the side the gold of those dunes. Now moving to a place that you may not be familiar, but you may recognize the painting as it's hanging in your show. I hope you can grasp the idea now of my process, and you're able to connect with the feelings that are portrayed here in this painting titled November Wood. It depicts a very chilly day in November at Devil's Den National Park in Arkansas. The trails were densely tree-lined along the stream that meandered through the park, and there was one little waterfall after another along our hike. I think I tried to use the verticality of these thin marks to suggest the spindly trees that were along the trails, and then the chilly pinks and reds that talk about the crisp air that day. And of course now the blue, once again, in all these vertical actions talking about the streams and the waterfalls going through the park. Now this one is called Scarlet River. It is a 36 by 36 inches oil on canvas, and it really is just about all the wildfires we've been experiencing in California. And the bold red really does talk about the awesome power of fire. But popping out underneath its surface are these little tidbits of green. And for me, that's trying to express the hope that comes after fire. So as our Rose Compass group, we were able to go back in and revisit some of these burned areas. And even at the base of the most charred of trees were usually little sprouts of green starting up again. So fire really is one of nature's way of regenerating life. A little hope. Now, two of my favorite pieces are Timekeeper 1 and 2, and this is Timekeeper 1. It is 50 by 52 inches. It's oil on canvas, and again, the size, the scale of it is really meant to encompass you. The inspiration are the beautiful aspens right outside of Santa Fe and Santa Fe National Forest. And I loved walking in and about these big autumn towers, and the mountains in the distance were just ablaze in gold and sienna, and the leaves were clattering this great clapping sound, almost like music. And the flurry of the leaves and the spindly branches swaying in the wind were just like chaos to my eyes. And that brought about Timekeeper 2. Oops. Now, Timekeeper 2 is also 50 by 52 oil on canvas, and the title, Timekeeper, plays on the idea of the change of seasons, like clockwork every year, announcing that winter is on its way. I hope you see and feel these towering golds of autumn colors and those siennas, and also notice the little staccato marks that create a pattern horizontally across the surface. This is really what I'm trying to do, is evoke that clattering movement and sound of the leaves. Now I have a friend, and I noticed she just popped in back there, that has a beautiful cabin in Pine Mountain. And very near her cabin is a small mountain pond that is always filled with the reflections of the seasons in the reeds and the tall pines. Plus, the waves shimmer constantly over the surface as the ducks play on the surface. And I hope you can feel that same kind of life in this painting called Spring Flight. It's 42 by 96 inches, and its large scale is really meant to be felt like a pond itself. And finally, like Joan Mitchell, sometimes all I have to do is walk out into the garden and be inspired. So this seasons have brought agapantha, magnolia, and most recently, angel trumpets. So, observation, memory, and invention, they all play a vital role in my process. And in the end, I want my paintings to transcend nature and become their own wilderness, their own wild place. Thank you.
Wow.
Before I open this up to questions and answers, hopefully, I'd like to offer that I brought cards and announcements that talk about the show that Gib talked about coming up. It's called The River's Journey. It will be at the Wildling Museum of Art and Nature beginning February 17th through July 9th of 2018. If you're interested in it, I have cards and all kinds of information on it, and I'd love to speak more about it if you're interested. So, does anyone have a question? I'm sure you do.
So you work from, do you often, I mean, occasionally I saw you do realistic sketches in gouache.
Yes.
But almost invariably a sketch in gouache on location to record your, kind of your reaction or the things you're seeing, and then you blow that up into a much
bigger
oil.
piece.
Yeah, which is very traditional landscape painting practice, to go out and do a sketch and then create a bigger
And I do
piece.
a little bit of all those things. Sometimes if the place is so new, a first visit may just be photos, just to kind of get your head wrapped around what am I seeing, what's the atmosphere, what are the shapes here, what's the temperature, how does it smell, is the wind involved? And then you go back and we've done it all kinds of ways. We happen to be a group of 6 women that are a part of the Rose Compass, and 3 of them are very much plein air, traditional, go out and they go down and plop up, figure that one point, and there's 3 of us that are more studio painters, and we tend to kind of wander around a little bit more and find our place, and then at the last minute we're like, well, we better get a sketch done, you know. So it kind of, both of them play, but sometimes I'll start and just almost abstractly and just kind of get the essence of what's going on. But like Red Rock, it would just happen to be one of those places that, coming from Texas and coming out here, it was such a new shape and a feel for me that it seemed like it needed every aspect. It needed a photo, and then I needed to go through and draw it and then take it on to, more abstract pieces.
So that's how you bring it within you.
Yes.
So that you can then reshape it through your memories and observation into something inventful.
Yes, that's well stated. You should do the talk. No. Mary.
How do you come about your sizes of your canvases? I noticed you had like a 50 by 52. Why wasn't it a 50 by 50?
Because sometimes, there's a lot of answers to that. I think size is very important in talking about the essence of what you're trying to get across. So I'm lucky that I have the ability to make it any size that I want to make it. And sometimes I tend to do these 10 by 36s to see if it's a viable enough or strong enough idea to take it to 72 inches. But sometimes I'll just go straight to 72. I've got it, I know where I'm going to take this, and it just happens. But the little Nahoy Falls pieces, I started out because, again, waterfalls are not something I'm that familiar with. So I started out at the little 8.5 by 3 inches, and then I took it up to 36 by 10 inches and did an oil piece. And I have one that's about 3/4 finished that's now 72 inches by 34. So, sometimes it takes just that redoing it until you can own it enough to say, these are my marks, this is my subject, and I've got this. So, but size, like I showed on the one with the bright oranges, it's called Wild Volunteer, and it's about the big poppies. I started that out big because it was a big mountain, and I knew immediately, well, how silly to make it little. It's about something big. In fact, I wish I'm going to get to that point where I can take that up to 80 inches, make it really big, because it's a big, not only is it a mountain, but what happens on it is so significant. It's so different. No one else sees this. It's so unusual, so you might as well make it as big as possible. But I did have an occasion that I needed something small, and I thought, well, I'm going to see if I can make that. I'd just done that little 3 by 3 inch abstraction. It was so hard to do, that little. But that made me think, I'm going to try to take this big idea and see how hard it would be to make it, that small. Because I think that one's also, it's pretty close. It's like 3 or 4 inches. So, that's pretty small to do a big idea on. And just see if they relate. And it's real fun to see them. It's actually much bigger when they're projected than they really are. They're really small ideas, but to see how well they hold up, when projected. Yeah.
But back to her question, why 50 by 52?
Oh, that's that part. I just don't want to fall into any kind of, expectations, what is expected. I like that it caught your attention, that it's not a perfect square. And so give those 2 inches, and notice 52 is not the height, it's the horizontal. So it's the width. So that's my ode to the landscape. It's just 2 inches, but it doesn't quite fall into just being an expected piece. I had my graduate counselor, she always painted in squares, and she assured me that the square was the easiest composition that you could do. You could do anything. You could do a top third, do it in half, do it in quarters. You could divide it in any way, and it always looked good. And her canvases were always successful. But I don't know, there was just something about, I didn't want to be able to have an easy time of it. So that 2 inches really does, it knocks you off a little bit. So
do you stretch your own canvas?
I do. So in the most recent few months, I did, for however old I am, we'd build the stretcher bars, and then at some point I had a lady in Santa Fe come to me and said, let me build your stretcher bars, and she built out one for me, and I went, okay, this knocks off one thing. I trust somebody else to do it as well as I would have done it. And then just recently, and we're hoping he stays out there and produces it, this guy from Long Island, right?
Long Island City.
He hounded me for over a year and said, let me build a canvas for you. And so I said, okay, build a square 36 by 36, and I don't like the canvas you're using. Can you use the heavier canvas that I use? He said, no problem. He sent it, and I was just knocked out. I said, this is great. There's actually canvas on here. He gessos it, but I re-gesso it and do it my way, because no one gessos like I do. You know, I mean, every step along the way is so personal. So it has to do with how tight it is. If it's too loose, I can't paint on it. If it's too tight, you know, it's just that perfect a little bounce that happens.
Do you ever paint on linen?
I've painted on linen. I do a lot of portraits on linen. So you'll see on my website, I have a section that's on portraits and then one on abstraction. So Gib had asked me earlier, like, are you an abstract expressionist? You know, I said, well, you know, I'm an artist. And I just feel like the answer is I do whatever it takes to convey the essence of what I want to convey. And if that means a small gouache painting or an etching or a bronze piece or whatever, you know, I kind of move through stages in my life, but I've worked in almost every medium there is, and just this year happens to be a lot of gouache and a lot of oil on canvas. So, you guys, thank you so much for your interest. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for your good questions.
Okay, and where are we now?
Where are we, Beth?
Oh, right, physically at the Carpinteria Art Center for the abstract show.
Thinking
That Connie-
Abstractly.
Thinking Abstractly, that Connie Connally juror for us.
And Beth and I have kind of met a few years ago through a mutual friend, and I've been watching her work really, really grow, and I've just been so happy to see her shapes and line work coalesce and really have a sense of energy. I mean, you really do feel the emotion in her pieces. Tell me what inspired this.
This was inspired from a trip to Page, Utah, and Page, Arizona, through the slot canyons there, and we had an opportunity to go down into the slot canyons. And from that was that energy and that movement of the wind coming through and imagining the water coming through and making these formations. And so from pictures and then sketches and then movement, and I use lots of color. Color gives me energy, and so that's what has come from this, from a series of breathless, of just things that take my breath away.
And I think that's the point, and that's our conversations have been, that you as the spectator, you may not know the exact origin of her inspiration, even that it was a landscape, but you do feel the movement and the essence of what inspired her. So that's what, you know, I'm asking all of my your audience. They come with their own stories. So you create a whole nother dynamic when you come to the painting. And that's what's so important. So you set the tone for it, and you give other people that, oh, that reminds me of, you know, and then all of a sudden your own story adds to that. So there was another lady that wanted me to critique her piece. Oh, it was you, right here.
And it's right behind you there.
Oh, okay.
Why don't you go over there?
Yeah, this is mine.
Yeah.
I'll just put it down here, is that okay?
Now tell me your name again.
Kate Eden.
Kate.
Hi.
This is a beautiful
Thank you.
piece. Now tell me a little bit about.
Well, the title is Split Mind, Grief One. So my mother passed away, and the ashes were buried in West Virginia, and some were supposed to come to me, and so I had no opportunity to close it for any level of memorial. So the bottom part, this is this is done in oil and ash.
Oh.
And
So it is very personal. Yeah.
Right, and the bottom
Yeah.
part is about the world of form. and it's pretty strident. There are structures, there are lines, there are boundaries. Then you move into abstraction. And so I started writing characters. There's a little Russian character, there's Arabic, there's some Japanese characters.
In text, yeah.
Right, because they're symbols. We're now moving away from form into symbols. And then the top part are actually chakra colors, but these are interior colors from the inside of my mind. And it's about, you know, like letting it go and moving into something else, some level of transcendence, and letting it go.
Oh, that's
Letting
what
her
it feels
go.
like, yes.
And, yeah.
You know, because when I saw it, I really saw angst. And I did feel that there was a balance, that there was something happening that was resolving that angst. And I wasn't certain what the fire was about, but I knew it was fire and ashes. I mean, that part was very Ansel Kiefer kind of, you know, inspiration. So, I mean, I love that because whether that's your story or my story, I have similar stories, and I bring that to it as well and say, gosh, I know how that feels.
Well,
you know?
so when you talked about using, I'm a landscape painter, and I have not forayed into abstract very often. And I had big feelings to paint, and there was no way, you know, there just wasn't any way to do it. So, I mean, I used palette knives, I threw crap at it, I just had so much fun.
But see, isn't that great that through abstraction, you were able to really express those feelings
Yes.
that are, in my opinion, are very hard to do just in a straightforward abstraction or landscape painting. I'm sorry.
Absolutely.
And I just think abstraction, it does require some on the viewer's part to take time to think about what's going on there. But you know, because it's not like a very realistic painting that someone can go by and go, oh, that's nice. And then they just don't seem, in my opinion, to really get into it the way, if you love abstraction, you come in and you think, ooh, what is that?
Yeah,
You
I'll
know,
start thinking.
Colors are beautiful.
Yeah,
and the
thank
colors really are,
I love that green.
Thank you.
What you've done with it.
you. Thank you. Well, this is the color of love.
Well,
This is the heart chakra. This is the color. We thought green was for money, but it's the color of love. And so, really, that's
what you're giving out.
That's
Yeah.
the resolution.
That's great.
That.
Yeah.
So,
And did you have a piece you wanted?
I have a small piece here, this
thank you, Connie.
beige one right there.
Could you stand over there?
Yeah. Come talk to me about it.
I'm sorry?
Come talk to me about it.
I'm trying to remember, I think it had to do with spaces that we live in.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe an aerial view of partial living quarters.
Right.
That's it, but you know, you start with an idea and then you get carried away, or I do.
Well,
right? Composition, color.
There is always a point at which you have to let the painting guide you.
Right.
It becomes its own resolution. Because if you keep trying to force your idea back on top of it, it really just loses its heart. And I do feel, I grew up in an airplane. My dad happened to be a pilot, and that's what I saw in it when I first looked at it, was an aerial view of all those spaces that I've flown over. But in my case, because it's so expansive, I kind of got the feel that it was more, being expansive instead of compartmentalized. So, and also just the earthy colors that are going on there. It's beautiful, and it's beautifully composed. You did, and I love this hot color right here that just really creates a new dynamic. You know, it makes your eye go across and find all these colors underneath. So you have some beautiful surfaces going on as well.
Thank you.
So,
Connie, I have a little, really small one,
okay.
and I'm Connie as well.
All right.
Are you Constance?
No, my mom just stuck with straight Constance.
I'll speak to you just briefly about this.
Okay, let me grab this one. Okay. Okay.
And so I usually work with a lot of color, and I wanted to play with the absence.
Quiet, everybody. Go ahead.
Tell me again.
So I usually work with a lot of bright colors. I love color, and I've been playing around with not using so much color. And I've been intrigued with the moonscape and the pictures from NASA in space. And so that's what, and then working with resin and not resin and texture. So that was my idea.
Yeah, your,
for it. Yes.
how do you call it? Point of departure.
Yes, point of departure.
Well, one, I'm surprised that it's such a small scale.
I know. It's a
I would love
study.
to
I'm gonna
challenge
make
you
it
to make a
big
much
one.
bigger piece
Yes.
for that big idea that you
Yes.
have.
Thank you.
You know, to really push it to where it's as big as the idea that you're presenting.
Thank you.
But it's beautifully done. There's so much mystery in it, so it does feel kind of lunar in a way,
Yes, it
you know.
does.
So I think you're in the right direction.
Thank you.
That it doesn't always take color to express an idea. Sometimes the absence of color is just as powerful.
Thank
So-
you, but it was an idea.
So
to
next
try
year-
and then make a great big one.
Make it big.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. You're welcome. You're welcome. And I think you had a little piece you wanted to talk about. Sorry, we're kind of going back and forth. Sorry.
So how do you get these big pieces into shows? I hear so many abstract painters talk about how the small pieces are the ones that move into these group shows if you want to get your work out.
Yeah, that's not something I try not to worry about. I never go to my palette and worry about,
Good point.
is this going to make it in a show? I need to answer yes, it will find its place. And so I don't enter very many shows at this point. And so if there's it has to only be 24 inches, I'm like, I'll go through my racks if I really have to enter something, but it's not a significant way I start anything. And your name's Mary. Nice to meet you. And this is your piece?
Yes, and this is my mother, and I wanted to show the moving away of her spirit as she got older. I expressed it in her 70s, and this in her 80s, and this in her 90s. She lived till she was 99. But just
Right.
to let the color
Fade away.
Fade away.
Beautiful. And how well and appropriate was that this is the only figurative piece that I can think of, in particular, almost a portrait, that made it into the abstract
I know,
show.
I was so surprised.
But that's what I loved about it, is you showed someone in 3 different ways, and you could tell the idea was something about this person changing for you, or there was something about it. But I loved how she must have had a good spirit.
Yes.
And I love that about it, because I could see that you're trying to get, the spirit of that person in this depiction. And this one, and I'm glad you did 3, because I don't think, one of them wouldn't have been the abstract thought, but it did take all 3 to really express that idea and concept of someone slipping away from you. Well, I hope her essence stays right here for you.
Well,
Very
yes.
well done.
Well, I was with her all these years. She lived with us, and so it was wonderful.
You got to experience
Yes.
that. Well, thank you. Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Go ahead.
Mary, I think Mary won first place, and just before the show started, I was asked why I chose this piece as first place, because color is such an important part of my work. And I said, well, line is also probably the most important part of beginning any work or expressing things. So that's why I was drawn to it, and I love the power of your line work. Tell me a little bit about your
Well,
piece.
actually, I love to draw, and I'm also a printmaker, which this is a print, this is an etching, and each of these squares is a 2-inch individually inked etching plate, all put on the press at the same time and run through at the same time. And of course, being a drawer, I love line. And so I just decided to look around me in nature, and you can see, illusions of some nature, and also technology. with some of these pieces here, and to combine the two, and to hopefully get people, when they look at this, to kind of be aware of what's around you, you know, in simple line, and I think that it's probably more powerful in a black and white than it would be. And this piece, and I've done probably 10 different ones, and of course you can imagine
Variations,
that
yeah.
each one could just be changed, and it'd be a whole different thing. But it started out as an exercise in technique for me. If you're a printmaker, you can't have any little smudgy pieces on the edge of your plates, and so my challenge was to get each of those. And if you'll notice that they're all slightly off, because it was going to be almost impossible to get everything just.
That's perfect.
So I purposely offset.
Well, one of the things that I was very attracted to in Mary's work was just the quality and expertise of her work. And those little things about printmaking that are so hard and no one, you know, really recognizes is so beautifully demonstrated here. And the one thing that really struck me immediately, even before I started putting together like, oh, that's more organic and this is more, you know, like you were saying, technology, was just the conversation. And again, bringing my own story to it, and that's all I can bring. I can't bring Mary's story because I don't know her story. But for her, she may be looking at line to line, but I'm looking at it going, well, isn't this an interesting juxtaposition, you know, of these kinds of marks, and this seems to be real mechanical, and this seems to be organic, and then this little tiny minute little lines against these really bold ones. So I just was really enjoying the conversation and all the different textures that were being created in that conversation. Great job.
Thank you.
Good place to end on first place.
Yeah, I'm in the back. Didn't get it really at the start. Yeah.
I'm thinking it summer's over.